Hi, my name is Ashley Zagers, and in my presentation I will be discussing the importance of death in children's literature. My first experience with death of a loved one happened when I was 13. My grandmother died of heart failure, and it was a slow decline into death. Luckily for me, I have a very large extended family and support system, so going through the grieving process was smoother than what most had. I was old enough to understand the finality of death and the emotions that came with the grieving process. However, many children are not as fortunate. 1 out of 5 children experience the death of someone close to them by the age of 18. 7 out of 10 teachers have a student in their classroom that has experienced the death of a loved one in the past year. We, as the adults of society, need to know how to address this situation with children in a healthy, appropriate manner. However, this is much easier said than done. Many adults, including myself, have a difficult time grasping the reality of our own mortality, let alone wanting to discuss it with someone else, especially with children. We as a society view children as innocent and pure, and talking to them about something as gruesome as death can be difficult. This lack of communication can lead to behavioral problems and a lack of social interaction, increasing their isolation that they already feel. This is where the role of books come in. Death itself has been present in children's literature for centuries, often used to teach moral lessons. Putting these ideas in a written form can change the perspective of a child and help them receive information outside of an oral conversation. In the more popular telling of Snow White by the Brothers Grimm, both Snow White is saved from a sleeping death from her prince, and the evil queen is forced to dance until she dies as punishment for harming Snow White. The problem is not that children cannot understand what death is, it is the ability to communicate to others their ideas or feelings that are often severed or gone unnoticed. Good children's literature can open up the dialogue that a family member or caregiver needs to appropriately address the event that is death of a loved one. There is a vast amount of books covering an array of different topics, from meaning of life to personification of death itself, and the grieving process that occurs after the event of a death, which the main goal is exposing the reader to death. The books that I want to highlight throughout are the best at portraying each of these topics and what impacts they can have on the reader. These books can create windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors for the reader, as discussed by Rudy and Sims Bishop. The reader can see the world or story that they could not see themselves otherwise, see themselves and people like them within the story, or engulf themselves completely within the world that the book creates. Books like Charlotte's Web by E.B. White try to teach children that death can be avoided for some time, but eventually inevitable. The main character's life, Wilbur the pig, is saved several times throughout the book, starting from the first page of the novel. First by Fern, the farmer's daughter, who saved Wilbur from being cold, since he was the run of the litter. Second by Charlotte, the barn spider that lives with Wilbur. When Wilbur finds out that he's being fattened up for the slaughter, he reacts in the same way that many people thinking about their own lives, panicking and stating over and over, "I don't want to die," and wanting to keep his routine life the same that it always has been. Charlotte then devises a plan to save Wilbur by weaving words into her web. This, however, leads to the death of Charlotte due to her short lifespan. What makes this book so important is the way that the characters act when thinking about death. Wilbur is terrified of death and change, wanting everything to stay the same. Templeton, a rat living in the barn and another animal on that farm, denies the idea of death completely, instead thinking for the day. Charlotte, however, has the healthiest reaction to death. She accepts that death is a natural part of life and embraces knowing her life was fulfilling. By reading the book, children are able to see themselves as the characters, and Wilbur can be a mirror for the reader, allowing themselves to be seen within the character of the pig, not physically, but in his mentality, and can learn through Charlotte that those thoughts are not the way to move through life. The book Cry Heart But Never Break by Glenn Rixved, and illustrated by Charlotte Pardee, shows the personification of death as a subdued old man visiting a quaint cottage filled with children living with their sick grandmother. At first, the children tried to stop and delay death from taking their grandmother. However, he is not so easily fooled, taking the life of the grandmother, but not before teaching the children the importance of both sorrows and joy, and that they should grieve for their grandmother, but not let her death consume their lives. What I found most important about the story was the illustrations. The drawings showed death not as a scary, fearful individual, but as a polite, quiet old man with soft features and a quiet disposition. One of the most powerful images was when the children were gathered around their grandmother. For this, many would be a terrifying image, knowing that death was coming to claim them. However, within the context of the book, the scene was peaceful, as the ill grandmother was finally being able to lay at rest. Reading the story impacted me the most and made me think back to when I lost my own grandmother. While the storyline can be often seen as upsetting, the book creates a sort of comfort within the pages and creates the idea that the book ends on a happy ending of sorts. Finally, the book The Rabbit Listened by Corey Dorfeld explored more of the feelings of grief rather than death itself. Instead of directly talking about death, the book uses the destruction of the child's brick tower as a metaphor for the destruction of the stability of a child's life after the death of a loved one. Several animals try to help the main character Taylor move past the destruction, but Taylor is not responsive to their ideas, leading them all to leave, except for the rabbit. The rabbit instead listened to Taylor and was there for her when they went through an array of emotions. This, I think, is the most important book in the series. Not only does it validate the emotions that people feel during the grieving process, but shows how an individual should treat their friends and family members when they themselves lose a loved one. Many think that when someone is grieving, they should leave them alone. However, this only increases someone's feelings of isolation. This book breaks the barrier and shows individuals should address the grieving person rather than ignore them. But you're probably asking yourself, why is this important? Why does it matter if children are able to learn and read about death? It all comes down to removing the idea of a single story. Writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie warns about the dangers of not showing only one perspective of a person or a topic. While the intentions of protecting our children are pure, the consequences can be detrimental. Only discussing death as something to fear or something so taboo it will lead children to fear death and not talk about it with others. These stories, however, create new narratives for death. The reader will not have to live in fear, rather live a free and more complete life once they accept that death is just a natural way for everything on earth. For myself, that death was my grandmother, and the support from my family and from sources that helped me cope. But for the sake of the children, let's talk about death.